I think that what is really special, again, that I'm thinking about in the book of Vayikra is the idea of connection. And it's actually like the starting point. So when it talks about there's this temple, and when I went to Israel, there was just a wall, and most people don't even realize it, right? You don't even notice that there's a wall. It just kind of is there. I remember when I was there, it just seemed very sad to me that it was this whole situation of where we are today. So when I think about in the desert and they had all these beautiful things, I think about they had this beautiful connection with Hashem, that it was this idea of Hashem wanted us to take responsibility, to be involved, he was investing in us, especially after everything that happened. And I think that, I feel like the same thing is going to happen, hopefully they say it's the times of Mashiach, that before we know it, we'll just be like in this rhythm of doing the things that we're supposed to do, even though it sounds so not the norm. But I realize like our generation, the way that we are, it's like we catch up quickly, and maybe that's how it's going to be. So when we look at the book of Vayikra, the first chapter, it talks about that Hashem mentions the word light 5 times, in obviously when it comes to creation. And this is dealing with the 5 books of Moshe. And I was thinking that the whole idea of Torah is timeless. And if you ever look at the idea of black and white, the idea of a beautiful picture that's classy and timeless, and it doesn't age. Whenever you want to make a cute little picture, I don't know if you do this, but I do this with my kids, or they do pictures for me, black and white, something funny, something cute, a little color, and it's very, very nice. I think the same exact thing is when it comes to Torah and creation. There is no real forward and backward, and it's all more like this timeless, beautiful story that keeps going on. And I think that's why when it mentions the 5 lights, you're like, okay, well, we know there's 5 books of Torah, but isn't that like where Moshe is? I mean, why are they going to the beginning? And again, I feel that it's that same tune and tone that happens throughout history, where it's the same style of people. Like when we're looking at Ukraine and we see everything that goes on, it's like in our mind we're remembering the same thing. It's just like a different generation, so that's how I look at it. Like there's just so much in the Torah that there is no real box. It's just timeless, like that black and white photograph. There's no real beginning, there's no real end. Even if we're told something is the beginning, there's always somehow that it's proven that it's not really the beginning. So I thought that was really something when I was looking at the Midrash mentions that the idea of the 5 different lights. It also talks about the little Aleph, and Moshe, of course, is very humble. I think that what is really incredible about Moshe that I'm thinking of course, it's his yard site coming up, but I think that especially with the leaders of today, we see everyone fighting with each other, trying to get to be the top, the leader. And then when someone is the leader, everyone else is like criticizing that leader. Like a situation where the leader is never humble. There is no humility. There is no concept in my mind of how a leader can get to that point. Like we look in the Torah and like, oh yeah, we just expect it to be like the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then there's the bad guys and they're good guys, but the good guys have to be perfect, and the bad guys have to be like really horrible, and there's no in between. But yet when we see in our regular life these leaders, politicians, and other leaders of different places, and it seems to me like there's always someone who, unfortunately, wants to put someone else down. There doesn't seem like these really good leaders. Of course, there are good leaders, but I'm saying I think overall. So I think, of course, when it comes to, in my mind, I feel like in the religious world, there are really good leaders. And I'm sure other places in the world, there's also really good leaders too. But it just seems like the general, you know what I'm saying? The general concept, it seems very that the leaders are definitely not Moshe. Incredible. He knew how to talk to the people. He knew, really what to say to them. I also think about someone who's barely mentioned, like very, very rarely mentioned. And today there's this, person that I really care about, and she is a convert, and I was really impressed with her. What seemed to be the problem is that all of a sudden she's not really interested in any more option. And it isn't an option because once a Jew, always a Jew. So that's how we look at it. So if I was asking the same questions because I'm thinking, well, she wants to marry this guy who's completely not religious, and yet she was the scarf for years, and so it was just really hard to see that. And they're still Jewish according to halacha, and their children and their children's children will always be Jewish. If they're serious, there's no going, which is incredible. And so there was this other lady that I know, and she had this crazy story happen to her. And so at some point she decides that she's no longer going to be Jewish. So she converted to it. So she's Mormon now. And it's devastating because, there's nothing you can do. You just try to, because you care about them, and you just try your hardest you can to be. When I think of Sephora, so she's a convert. And the whole time, she just stands by Moshe. And at some point, she's no longer allowed to be with him anymore, because this is what, for that particular period in time, that's what's happening. She's not allowed to be with him anymore. She's not allowed to be with him anymore because Hashem decided that after he came down from the mountain, that he would always be. It was unlike anything ever before in history, because normally you're always. That's the whole thing with Miriam. Why she's complaining. She's like, we're all with our spouses. How come? What makes you greater? Why can't you be with Sephora? And what she didn't realize is it's much greater. And he was not allowed to be. He had to always be ready for Hashem, and he was not allowed to be with his wife, which would make him not ready for Hashem, because he'd have to go to mikvah before he would go and talk with Hashem. So, but I feel like she's never spoken about. She's never really. We don't really talk about her enough. She was a very righteous person to give her husband to her community and be like, okay, that's life. So I thought that was really an incredible. It really wasn't in this parsha, but the idea kind of fits in with how Moshe was so humble. And I feel like, well, you must really also learn from his wife and the sacrifices that she also did. So it talks about animal sacrifices, something that sounds so boring and so really not what's going on, like in our minds, how we think of it. We think of it as just, it's something that seems really not what we would do today. And the animal sacrifice, actually, I feel like it's something like right away Hashem started this animal sacrifice with them. Right away everyone gets into it. It wasn't something that they were used to, because in Egypt they didn't have this, didn't have any of this. So I thought that was pretty interesting what they did, that they all got together. But really, this is what Hashem wanted for them to give an atonement, to give a connection. So when we daven, people could think, oh, we're crazy. Now it becomes something normal, like you're praying. Oh, you're praying. It's, people do, and they have these like prayer circles, and it's become much more in style. But it used to be very out of style to do any type of prayer. But can you imagine doing sacrifices? It's really out of style. And here is what they would do. And it's really about connecting to Hashem. It talks about the sacrifices of atonement. That if you're not even aware of what you're doing wrong and you did something wrong, it's even worse than doing something right. So, knowingly doing something wrong. So, and it really just shows, like it's, you would think it'd be the opposite. Like if you don't know what you did wrong, what's the big deal? It's a mistake. What can you do? I think that it's because if you have a relationship with a person, you have a relationship and you're very close, you should try to know what really bothers that person. By saying certain things, you know their mechanism, you know what's going to get them angry. And a real friend, a real relationship, a real spouse, they're not going to get into it with the other one because they understand what they're supposed to do. Yes, of course, we're human and we're going to fight, and that's how it works. But when it comes to a relationship, especially what Hashem is trying to have with us, there's this beautiful concept of just in a very intimate way with Hashem. And so that for Hashem, it's about this expression of sacrifices, of understanding if you did wrong, of keeping holy to Hashem. And so that also meant if you did something and you weren't even aware of it, it's like the kid who doesn't pay attention, and you're like, well, don't go there, that's like the pool, and you sometimes get even more angry with the kid that, didn't know what they were doing because you feel so worried about them or so upset that they weren't paying attention. So that's really like the idea of, they have to pay attention. My son, they were going on this little boat. My husband used to take them on this little speedboat thing. We got secondhand. It must have been 100 years old. And one time the kids came back and fell in. And thank God he's a good swimmer. And he fell in the water, which is over 50 feet or something ridiculous and, middle of a lake. But he was fine. And of course I was so worried. Oh my gosh, my son, he fell in. Is he okay? How is he doing? So it's this type of, and of course I'm going to overreact, even though everything is fine. And I feel in some ways, of course, Hashem doesn't have to overreact with us. God is God, and it's not like that. We can't even imagine, but it's not like the way we think. But the relationship, it is in the sense of the more that someone cares, the more they're going to expect from you. If you're their child, if you're their very close friend, they're going to expect a certain type of relationship. And so when we're thinking, it just sounds so barbaric and so just boring, and really people actually did that. But at the same time, we have to realize that Hashem puts such effort into his people. And to then say, I really am want you to do this. If you do something wrong, you have to bring in a sin offering. And so each one was special. Each one was so particular because he cares. And the same way would be with if we expect something from our spouse, with our parents or our in-laws or whoever you're close with. And as time goes on, it's something that you expect more once you've been married longer or have known the person longer. So I think that's really where I see it. I guess you could say this whole beautiful, what seems almost like a boring chapter, I feel a lot of it is like the rules of relationship. And sometimes you also have to have details. So it talks about so much detail. And I think about the idea of poetry. When you want to write something, I like to write in prose, which is like a form of poetry, which you can write emotional, you can write silly, whatever you want to do. And I feel like the same way is with Hashem, that, you have all these details that sound so like really? What? No one's ever going to remember that in 100 years. I mean, it just is so, but that's the way he's showing us that he loves us. Every detail is so important. It's like the poetry that my husband gives me. It's like for me, I, in the beginning, could not remember any date. I'm not good with dates. And I can remember oh, yeah, mm-hmm. And that's how I do not know. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And finally, I started remembering. Even my kids' birthdays, I knew when their birthday was, but to remember both birthdays took me forever until my husband put them as their passwords in their iPads. Now I know them, and now I know them very, very well. So everyone has their own way, but I feel that details really do matter, even though I'm terrible at details, but they really matter to the one that you care about. When you remember them, remember the special things that you did,